The war in the south concluded at the Battle of Blackwater, where the Lannisters and Tyrells managed to uphold the rule of King Joffrey by securing a decisive victory against Stannis. This made the Lannister-Tyrell alliance in the south dominant, while in the north, Lord Tywin's intrigues promised to end the Stark threat. The new northern wardens, the Boltons, seemed secure in their rule of the north, but two remaining children of Eddard, Jon Snow and Sansa Stark, would soon launch a war to reclaim their homeland, which culminated in the Battle of Winterfell. Welcome to the 5th video in our series on the history of Westeros. We are grateful to ExpressVPN for sponsoring this video. ExpressVPN provides the fastest speeds and is consistently faster than other VPN providers and is very easy to use, connecting with just one click. ExpressVPN has the best-in-class encryption, thus protecting your privacy and anonymity. And if you're a gamer or really care about your online safety, ExpressVPN is your best choice. We also often need to access our YouTube accounts while traveling, and ExpressVPN helps us keep our data and accounts safe by encrypting our connection. And, most importantly, ExpressVPN allows you, no matter what country you're in, to watch Game of Thrones and other great shows and streaming platforms easily. It costs less than $7 a month with a 30-day money-back guarantee. To take back your internet privacy today and find out how you can get 3 months free, go to expressvpn.com/kingsandgenerals. Stark hegemony over the north was shattered in the aftermath of the Red Wedding in 300 AC, where King Robb Stark and most of his loyal bannermen were murdered by Roose Bolton and Walder Frey at the behest of House Lannister. As a reward for betraying the Starks and Tullys, House Bolton was given the status of Warden of the North, and the Lord of House Frey was made the Lord Paramount of the Trident. With Robb, his wife, heir and mother dead at the Red Wedding, the Starks were scattered across the map. As Arya was training to be an assassin, Bran was to the north of the Wall, and Eddard Stark's eldest daughter Sansa was captive in King's Landing when her brother was killed. Her bastard half-brother Jon Snow was a member of the Night's Watch, who had recently uncovered the return of the White Walkers. Meanwhile, Rickon Stark, who was Eddard's heir apparent with the disappearance of Bran, was in the custody of the Boltons. In 298 AC, the Stark children had split up after Eddard's appointment as the Hand of the King. Sansa had gone south with her father and had been imprisoned there ever since. With the commencement of the War of the Five Kings, Sansa essentially served as a highborn hostage to blackmail and threaten her brother Robb, who was waging war against King Joffrey's allies. After the Battle of the Blackwater ended Stannis' ambitions in the south, and most of the Starks were killed during the Red Wedding, the Lannisters sought to solidify Joffrey's power by marrying him to Margaery Tyrell, hoping to secure their powerful army and plentiful resources. During the wedding, a conspiracy bore fruit. A poisoned necklace, worn unknowingly by Sansa, contained a crystallized poison known as the Strangler, which Olenna Tyrell retrieved and placed in Joffrey's wine during the entertainment. The king drank the poisoned wine and perished during his wedding feast. As the guests and guards were distracted by Cersei's accusation of her brother Tyrion, Sansa made her escape with the help of Dontos Hollard, who had given her the necklace in the first place. At the docks, she was rescued by Petyr Baelish, while Dontos was killed. Over the next 1.5 years, Sansa travelled north with Baelish. They first stopped at the Eyrie, where Baelish organised Sansa's next stop, her former home of Winterfell. The Boltons, who were seeking to solidify their hold on the north, betrayed the Lannisters and secretly arranged for the newly legitimised Ramsay Bolton to marry Sansa. After suffering at his hands for a few months, Sansa escaped during the First Battle of Winterfell with the help of Theon Greyjoy, as the Bolton forces were all taking part in an attack against Stannis. After Stannis' forces were ground down by attrition and enemy harassment, 1,300 remaining Baratheon infantry desperately marched to Winterfell, and were met by 5,000 Bolton soldiers, including 2,000 cavalry. The cavalry easily outflanked the opposing infantry, crushing their enemy. Stannis was killed in the aftermath of the battle. As the Stark fugitive and her saviour travelled north to Castle Black, her brother Jon Snow had just returned from beyond the wall, where he had saved a large number of the wildling population from destruction by the White Walkers at the fall of Hardhome. However, the Night's Watch and the wildlings had been fighting each other for centuries, and this gesture of kindness by Jon Snow led to his death at the hands of his own comrades. However, the sorceress Melisandre, who had abandoned Stannis before his defeat at Winterfell, used her resurrection magic to bring Jon back to life, proclaiming that he was Azor Ahai, the legendary ancient hero reborn, instead of the late Baratheon claimant. This temporary death released Jon from his oath to the Night's Watch, and upon reuniting with his sister Sansa, he slowly came to approve of the idea of retaking their home from the Bolton Usurpers. Things were not quaint in Winterfell, as Ramsay Bolton murdered his father in response to the birth of a true-born son who might have supplanted him as the future Warden of the North. This true-born son and his mother were then killed by the brutal Ramsay, who fed them to his hounds. Knowing Sansa had taken shelter with her brother at Castle Black, Ramsay sent them a letter, revealing that he was in possession of Rickon Stark, the youngest of Eddard's children. He threatened to kill Rickon, murder the wildlings, and have unspeakable things done to Sansa if she were not returned to him. At this vile insult and threat, Jon decided to take back his home and began to slowly raise an army. Unfortunately for them, two of the largest and most powerful vassal houses of the north, Houses Karstark and Umber, had already become solid allies of the Bolton Usurpers. This meant that the revanchist Stark siblings had to start small, a task made even more difficult by the presence of 2,000 wildlings in their army, who had fought the Northmen for many centuries and who joined the newly formed Stark army first. At the same time, Sansa met with Baelish in Molestown. He offered her the assistance of the Knights of the Vale, but she declined him due to him previously selling her to Ramsay. Nevertheless, he also informed Sansa that her uncle, Brynden Tully the Blackfish, had rallied the remaining Tully army and had retaken Riverrun. She dispatched Brienne of Tarth to secure his forces, but this failed. The Starks now turned to the smaller houses, and by the time they marched towards Winterfell, they had around 2,400 soldiers, mainly axe and sword-wielding infantry, with some archers and cavalry supporting them. The latter were commanded by Davos Seaworth, who joined the Starks after Stannis was killed. The Starks also had one giant fighting for them. Meanwhile, the Boltons had 6,000 soldiers, including 2,000 Bolton cavalry, 3,000 infantry, and 1,000 men from Houses Karstark and Umber. Parley attempts between the two sides failed when Ramsay declined Jon's offer to prevent the battle by single combat, and when Jon refused to accept Ramsay's terms of surrender. The night before the conflict began, Sansa sent a raven to Petyr Baelish, who was encamped at Moat Cailin, having changed her mind about asking for his assistance. The opposing armies formed up across the freezing plains outside of Winterfell on a misty morning, with 6 flayed and burning corpses tied to crosses in between the two forces, an attempt by Ramsay to intimidate his foe. Archers were in the front line of both armies, with cavalry in the second line and infantry in the third. In addition, House Bolton had a contingent of soldiers trained to act as a phalanx, with one line holding a large shield in front and a second armed with a long pike. Before the battle began, the youngest Stark sibling, Rickon, was used as bait by Ramsay Bolton, who played a game by allowing the boy to run towards his brother's army while Ramsay shot arrow after arrow at him, possibly missing deliberately the first 3 times. In response, Jon charged alone on horseback in the hopes of rescuing the boy, but Rickon was struck through the torso just before Jon reached him. The Stark commander was now right where Ramsay wanted him, trapped alone in the middle of the battlefield. Ramsay commanded the Bolton archers to rain arrows down on and behind Jon, preventing him from moving back to his own line, if not killing him outright, and his horse was killed under him. At this point, Davos ordered his own cavalry as well as the wildling infantry to charge and assist their commander. Now that Jon was vulnerable, Ramsay ordered his own 2,000-strong cavalry contingent to charge as well, in the hopes of finishing his enemy off. The two charging forces met in the centre of the battlefield and a vicious melee began, with both sides suffering heavy casualties in the first few minutes. In order to support their infantry, archers on both sides were ordered to loose arrows into the cavalry engagement. While Ramsay had no qualms about killing some of his own men as well as many enemies, Davos refused and stopped his archers from firing. This continuous withering storm of Bolton arrows caused titanic losses on both sides, creating a mound of corpses on the battlefield which was a dozen feet in height. However, since the Bolton numbers were superior, they could afford to suffer the losses. Seeing the reserves and archers were effectively useless in this situation, Davos ordered the rest of his infantry to charge and his archers to take up their swords and attack also, in addition to the single giant they had on their side. However, this was the moment Ramsay was waiting for. Now that the entirety of the Stark army was committed and pinned down, the Boltons dispatched their infantry, commanded by Small Jon Umber, to surround the mass of Jon's mainly undisciplined wildling army with large shields and spears on three sides, while sword and axe-wielding footmen halted any escape attempts over the corpse mound to the rear. The Bolton phalanx advanced forward and began to slowly melt away the Stark forces. Just as it seemed all was lost, war horns began to sound in the distance. Over a hill surrounding the battlefield, the White Falcon banner of House Arryn flew, and 2,000 heavy mounted knights crashed into the unprepared Bolton phalanx, devastating it and effectively destroying Ramsay's remaining forces. Seeing that this unexpected turn of events had annihilated his army, Ramsay retreated to Winterfell, pursued by Jon, Tormund Giantsbane, and the Giant. In what was his and his species' final act, the Giant broke down the gates of Winterfell, taking hundreds of crossbow bolts and arrows before finally perishing. Winterfell was taken, and Ramsay was later killed by his own hounds. Casualties in this battle are unknown, but the vast majority of the wildlings and Northmen who fought for the Starks were dead, as were the majority of the Bolton army, who were crushed by the Arryn reinforcements, who in turn suffered only light losses. The Stark banners flew over Winterfell once again, and Baelish, who had essentially won the battle for Jon, now held a position of influence at the new Winterfell court. Though trouble still loomed for the resurgent Starks, they could now look to the north and to the true threat. Jon knew that the army of the dead was marching south. Our series on G.R.R. Martin's universe will continue, so make sure you are subscribed to our channel and have pressed the bell button. We would like to express our gratitude to our Patreon supporters and channel members who make the creation of our videos possible. Now you can also support us by buying our merchandise via the link in the description. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.